I used to think my mother was just ordinary, quiet, distant, maybe even cold at times. She wasn't the kind of woman who said, "I love you," out loud. She showed it through actions, cooking, cleaning, worrying. But somehow, I never saw it for what it really was. When I was younger, I used to tell myself that one day I'd leave that tiny house behind and make something of myself. I'd roll my eyes when she'd ask too many questions, and I'd get irritated when she'd call me 3 times a day just to ask, "Did you eat?" Now I'd give anything to hear that one more time. The day she died, the house felt like it lost its heartbeat. There was this strange silence, heavy and sharp, like even the walls knew she was gone. She had passed in her sleep. Peaceful, they said. But to me, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt cruel, like someone had taken a piece of my story and ended it without asking. I remember standing in her room, staring at her bed. It still smelled like her, that faint scent of jasmine and laundry powder. Her reading glasses were folded neatly on the nightstand, her rosary beside them, and a half-drunk cup of tea sat cold near the window. She had always kept things tidy, even to the last breath. I didn't cry right away. I couldn't. It was like my body didn't believe it yet. It wasn't until I saw the old photo of us, the one where I was 6 years old, sitting on her lap, that it hit me. Her smile in that picture was so warm, so alive. I fell to my knees and sobbed like a child again. In the days that followed, everyone came by to offer condolences. Neighbors brought casseroles, cousins whispered stories about her kindness, and old friends talked about her patience. They all said the same thing. She was a strong woman. She lived her life for her daughter. She never complained. And I kept wondering, what did they mean she lived for me? I never thought I'd hear that phrase again until one evening when I started sorting through her things. It was 2 weeks after the funeral. The house felt emptier than ever. I decided to pack away her clothes, though every fabric felt like a goodbye. As I folded her sweaters, I found a small, worn-out box tucked under her bed, the kind of box you'd keep your most private memories in. Inside, there were old letters, a few receipts, and a single gold ring I'd never seen before. There was also a small envelope with my name written on it, Anna. Her handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably hers. For a moment, I just stared at it. I couldn't bring myself to open it right away. My hands trembled. It felt like she was still there, still trying to tell me something. When I finally opened it, there were just a few lines written inside. "My dear Anna, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you the truth myself. I've hidden many things, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I just hope you'll understand one day. Everything I did was for you. With all my love, Mom." That was it. No explanation, no story, just that. But those words wouldn't leave my mind. Everything I did was for you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, her small laugh, her soft sighs when she thought I wasn't listening. What truth was she talking about? What had she hidden? I decided to look deeper into that box. There were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to someone named Mrs. G, each one written in my mother's handwriting. Some were dated years back, even before I was born. One of them caught my eye because the paper was stained with what looked like tears. I unfolded it gently and began to read. Dear Mrs. G, I've made my decision. I will take responsibility for everything. Please make sure he doesn't know. Anna must never find out. My heart started pounding. Who was he? What was she taking responsibility for? The more I read, the more questions I had. The next morning, I went to see my mother's closest friend, Aunt May. She'd known my mother since childhood and had been like family to us. When I showed her the letters, her face went pale. Where did you find these? She asked, clutching the papers like they might burn her. Under her bed, I said. Aunt May, what did she mean by all this? Who's Mrs. G? For a long moment, Aunt May didn't speak. Then she sighed, her eyes filling with tears. Your mother was a brave woman, Anna. She went through things most people couldn't survive. What things? I whispered. Aunt May hesitated, then took my hand. There are things she never told you because she wanted to protect you. She carried burdens that weren't hers. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice trembling. She just shook her head. It's not my story to tell, dear, but maybe it's time you found out. Those words haunted me. That night, I sat in my mother's room again, surrounded by her memories, the soft ticking clock, her folded shawl, the scent of old perfume. I went through every drawer, every folder, searching for clues. And then I found it. A sealed brown envelope at the back of her old dresser. It was labeled Anna's Future. Inside was a stack of receipts, hospital bills, payment slips, and an old legal document. I recognized the hospital's name. It was the same one where I had surgery when I was 8 years old. I remember that time vaguely. I was sick, but I never knew the details. The papers told a story I never knew. The surgery had been expensive, far beyond what my mother could afford. There were payment records showing she had made small deposits for years, slowly, quietly, paying off a debt she never mentioned. I saw her signature on every paper. It was shaky, desperate, but steady. My chest tightened. Tears blurred my vision. All those years, when I thought she was being stingy or overly careful with money, when she said, "We can't afford that," she wasn't being strict. She was saving my life. I sat there for hours, holding those papers against my chest. Memories came rushing back, her tired eyes, her worn-out hands, the way she'd smile even when she had nothing. I finally understood what she'd meant in that letter. Everything I did was for you. I felt guilt and love and sorrow all at once. How could I have missed it? How could I have misjudged her all those years? The next morning, I went to her grave. The sky was cloudy, the air still. I knelt beside her headstone and traced her name with my fingers. Mom, I whispered, I found out. I know now. My voice cracked as I continued. You were right. I didn't understand before, but I do now. You carried everything alone, for me. The wind brushed through the trees, and for a moment, it felt like she was there, like she was listening. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, thank you for loving me in silence. That was the day everything changed. The day I realized that sometimes love doesn't need to be loud or spoken. Sometimes it hides in the quietest sacrifices, in the meals cooked, the bills paid, the tears unseen. And by the time we finally understand, it's often too late to say thank you. But still, I did. and I always will. I grew up in a small house at the end of Maple Street, the kind of place where neighbors still said hello, where every creaking floorboard told a story, and where Mom somehow made everything feel safe, no matter how little we had. Our home wasn't fancy. The paint on the porch peeled every summer, and the roof leaked when it rained too long. But Mom always said, it's not how big your house is, it's how much love you put inside it. I never really understood that until I was much older. When I was little, Mom worked at the local diner. She'd wake up before the sun, make my breakfast, braid my hair, and then hurry off with her small brown bag of lunch. Sometimes I'd see her walking down the street from our window, her coat buttoned wrong in her morning rush, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. I used to complain that she never came to my school plays or field trips. At the time, I thought it was because she didn't care. I didn't know she was working double shifts just to afford the costume for that play or that field trip fee I barely remembered handing her. She was always tired, but somehow she never complained. Every night she'd come home smelling like coffee and fried food. She'd sit by the window counting the few dollars she made that day and hum softly to herself. It wasn't a happy song, more like a prayer in disguise. I'd ask her, Mom, why don't you ever buy anything for yourself? She'd smile and say, I already have everything I need. At that age, I thought that was silly. Now I realize she truly meant it. There were days when we couldn't afford much food. She'd tell me she wasn't hungry, that she'd already eaten at work. But later, when I got older, I realized that was just her way of letting me have the last bit of soup or bread. She never told me how often she went to bed hungry, so I didn't have to. I remember one winter especially well. The heater broke and the nights were freezing. I woke up one morning and found her sitting on the edge of my bed, holding my hand, her own fingers ice cold. Why are you here? I had asked sleepily. She smiled. I just wanted to make sure you stayed warm, she whispered. Only later did I notice her old blanket in the corner, thin and worn. She'd given me both the good blankets and sat awake all night to keep me warm. Growing up, I thought love meant big gestures, gifts, hugs, words. My mother's love was none of that. Her love was quiet. It hid behind every sacrifice, every tired smile, every I'm fine when she clearly wasn't. But back then, I didn't see it that way. I was too busy wanting more. When I turned 16, I started working part-time at the grocery store. I thought I was helping her, but truthfully, I just wanted independence. I wanted to prove I didn't need her as much anymore. I remember one night when I came home late from work, she was sitting in the kitchen waiting up for me. The clock read 11:40. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me with that quiet disappointment that felt worse than anger. She finally said softly, I was worried. I'm fine, Mom. I'm not a kid anymore. She looked down at her hands. She whispered, I know, but you'll always be my little girl. I remember sighing, annoyed, and walking away. Now thinking back on it, that moment hurts the most, how I made her feel small for caring too much. When I left for college, she cried quietly at the bus station. She tried to hide it, but I saw the tears on her cheeks when she hugged me goodbye. She had packed me sandwiches and tucked a small envelope into my bag. When I opened it later that night in my dorm room, there was a $50 bill and a note that said, Don't go hungry, my love. You can call me anytime, even if it's just to say hi. Love, Mom. At the time, I rolled my eyes and thought, she worries too much. Now I understand that was her way of holding me, even when she couldn't. College was hard. I didn't have much, but I managed. Every month, somehow, she'd send me a small amount of money, $20, sometimes $50. She'd write, just something extra for books or groceries. I'd tell her not to, that she needed it more than I did. She'd laugh and say, don't worry about me. What I didn't know then was that she'd taken on extra cleaning jobs just to send that money. While I was out with friends, she was scrubbing floors, counting quarters, making sure I had enough to live the life she never could. When I graduated, She stood in the crowd clapping harder than anyone else. Her hands were calloused, her face lined with age, but her smile was pure pride. After the ceremony, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You did it, Anna. You did what I always dreamed of." And I remember saying, half jokingly, "We did it, Mom." But now I realize it wasn't a joke. We truly did it together. Only I didn't know how much she had done for that moment to happen. After graduation, I got a job in another city. Life became busier. Our phone calls grew shorter. Sometimes weeks would pass before I'd call her. She never complained. Every time I called, her voice was the same. Warm, steady, full of love. "Are you eating well?" she'd ask. "Do you get enough rest?" And I'd laugh, saying, "Yes, Mom, stop worrying." If I had known how little time we had left, I'd have called every day. The last time I saw her alive was on her birthday. I'd surprised her by visiting for the weekend. She was sitting on the porch knitting when I arrived. When she saw me, her face lit up like a child's. "Anna," she gasped, standing up, her arms wide open. I remember that hug, warm, trembling, full of love. She held on a little longer than usual, and now I understand why. That night, we talked for hours. She told me stories from her youth, about how she met my father, about the job she worked after he left. But there were parts she skipped over, moments she brushed aside too quickly, like turning a page she didn't want me to read. When I asked about my father, she smiled sadly. "She wasn't a bad man," she said softly. "Just someone who didn't know how to stay." And that was it. She never spoke badly about him, never blamed him, never pitied herself. That was just who she was. Strong, graceful, silent in her pain. Before I left that weekend, I hugged her again. She whispered, "Take care of yourself, my love." I smiled and said, "I always do." She laughed quietly. "You sound just like me." It was the last time I ever heard her laugh. A month later, the call came. It was Aunt May, her voice trembling. "She's gone, sweetheart. Your mother. She passed away in her sleep." The world fell silent. Everything around me, the traffic, the people, the noise, blurred into nothing. I couldn't breathe. I packed my bags and drove home in a daze. The house looked the same, but it felt lifeless. Even the wind seemed quieter, like it knew something sacred had left. When I walked into her room, everything was neat. Her slippers by the bed, her Bible on the nightstand, a soft light from the window falling across her pillow. It felt wrong to see everything still there, but her. Like her spirit had simply stepped out of the frame, leaving behind only the outlines of her love. For days, I went through her things, trying to feel close to her again. I touched her clothes, smelled her perfume, held her reading glasses in my hands. Every object carried a piece of her. And then came the box, the letters, the truth. That's when the story really began, when I realized my mother had spent her entire life not just raising me, but saving me. If love could be measured in silence, she loved me louder than anyone ever could. If sacrifice had a face, it was hers. And if regret had a name, it was mine. After the funeral, days blurred together. I moved through the house like a stranger, touching memories instead of walls. Every sound, the ticking clock, the squeaky floorboard, the wind rattling the old window, felt like her. But the silence was the loudest thing of all. I spent nights sitting by her window, the same one she used to stare through every evening. Sometimes I imagined her sitting beside me, whispering softly, "It's okay, Anna. You'll understand someday." And the truth was, I was starting to. Still, something in me needed more. I wanted to know everything. Why she wrote those letters, why she hid so much, and who she had been when she wasn't just my mother. A few days later, I went through her old desk. It was small, the wood faded, one leg slightly uneven from years of use. She used to sit there late at night, paying bills, writing grocery lists, humming quietly to herself. I searched for the key and found it taped under the desk, exactly the kind of simple trick she would have used. When I unlocked it, there was only one thing inside, a small leather notebook tied with a ribbon. The first page said, Private, 1986. That was the year before I was born. My heart began to race. I turned the pages carefully. Each entry was written in her neat, looping handwriting, the same one I'd seen on my lunchbox notes when I was little. Most of the early pages talked about her work, money troubles, and loneliness, but one line caught my eye. Dr. Miller said the test results are clear. I'll have to make a decision soon. God, please give me strength for Anna's sake. Anna. My name. But the date was months before I was even born. I kept reading. The next entry was shakier. He doesn't know it yet. I can't tell him. If I do, he'll leave for sure. I can raise her on my own. I have to. I froze. She had written that before I existed. And suddenly I realized the truth she had been hiding might have begun before my first breath. Aunt May's silence. The next morning, I visited Aunt May again. She was sitting on her porch with her cup of tea, as she always did, her eyes tired but pined. When she saw the notebook in my hands, she sighed. You found it, didn't you? I nodded. What was she talking about, Aunt May? What decision? Why couldn't she tell my father? She looked away, her eyes glistening. There were things your mother carried that she didn't want you to inherit. Pain, shame, sacrifice. Aunt May, please, I said softly. I need to know. She hesitated for a long time, then finally whispered, Your mother was sick before you were born, Anna. Very sick. I frowned, but I thought... She interpreted. No, Aunt May interrupted gently. She had a heart condition. The doctors told her that having a child would be dangerous. They said it could end her life. My breath caught in my throat. She didn't tell your father, Aunt May continued. He was already drifting away, losing work, losing hope. She didn't want to give him another reason to leave. So she made her choice. What choice? She chose you, Anna. I sat there in silence, unable to speak. My mother had risked her life just to bring me into this world. I remembered how she would sometimes clutch her chest when she was tired, how she'd sit down quietly after climbing the stairs, saying she just needed a minute. I'd tease her, calling her lazy, and she'd laugh it off. Now, those small moments took on an entirely different meaning. She'd been fighting for me before I even existed, and kept fighting long after she should have stopped. Guilt in hindsight. For days after that, I couldn't stop replaying my memories of her. Every time I'd rolled my eyes, every time I'd spoken sharply, every time I'd forgotten to call, I saw them all now, not as moments of frustration, but missed opportunities to love her better. One night, I found myself sitting on her bed, holding her old sweater close to my face. It smelled like her, soap, tea, and warmth. And I whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know. The tears came quietly, like rain on a soft roof. The visit to the hospital. A few days later, I went to the hospital listed on those old receipts. The building was newer now, the walls brighter, but the air still carried the same sterile chill. At the records desk, I explained who I was. The woman there looked at me kindly and went to check the archives. After some time, she returned with a folder, yellowed, worn, and marked confidential. Inside were medical notes. It confirmed everything Aunt May had said. The report was dated before my birth. It described my mother's heart condition, the risk of pregnancy, the warnings from her doctors. And yet, at the bottom, in her own handwriting, she had signed the consent form. I understand the risks. I accept them. Next to her name, in bold letters, the doctor had written, "Patient insists on proceeding, motivated by desire to have a child." My eyes blurred with tears as I traced her signature. That small, determined handwriting. It was the handwriting of a mother who chose love over fear. I thought that was the end of it, the truth she had hidden. But there was more. At the back of the folder, there were payment records and notes from a social worker. It seemed my mother had applied for financial aid after my birth, but was denied. Instead, she had taken on 3 jobs to pay off the bills. I remembered how she used to come home exhausted, her hands red and cracked from detergent. I remembered waking up sometimes and finding her asleep at the table, her pen still in her hand. And I finally understood why. When I came back home, I sat at her desk again, notebook open, tears silently falling onto the pages. Each line was a piece of her love written in pain. One final entry caught my attention. It was dated just a few months before she passed. "Anna doesn't know. She never will. That's how I want it. I want her to live free, not tied to my mistakes, not burdened by my choices. I've done my part. I just hope when I'm gone, she remembers me kindly." I couldn't breathe for a moment. She really believed I wouldn't forgive her, as if loving me wasn't enough, as if choosing me wasn't the most beautiful thing she'd ever done. For weeks, I struggled to accept it. I kept thinking about how she must have felt, keeping that secret all those years, how many nights she must have cried alone, how she smiled through the pain so I would never worry. I realized that love doesn't always come wrapped in words. Sometimes it hides behind silence, behind tired hands and unspoken prayers. I began visiting her grave more often, just to talk, to tell her about my day, about how I finally understood her, about how much I missed her. I'd sit there for hours whispering stories into the wind, hoping somehow she could hear them. One afternoon, as I was going through old photographs, I found one I'd never seen before. It was a picture of her, younger, standing outside the same hospital where I was born. She was holding a tiny baby, me, in her arms. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were pure joy. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, she had written, "Worth every moment, worth every risk." That was it. 6 words. 6 words that changed the way I saw everything. From that day on, I stopped feeling angry. I stopped wondering why she hadn't told me. I simply felt grateful for every meal, every hug, every quiet night she stayed up for me. Because sometimes the truest form of love is the one that never asks to be noticed. It had been almost 2 months since my mother passed, but grief doesn't understand calendars. Every morning still began with her absence. The air still smelled faintly like her tea, and the house still waited, like it expected her to walk in from the kitchen any minute. I'd started talking to her photo. It wasn't crazy, not to me. Sometimes I'd tell her about the weather. Sometimes I'd ask her why she didn't tell me everything. And sometimes, when I was too tired to hold myself together, I'd whisper, "I miss you, Mom. I wish you were here to explain." One rainy evening, I was sorting through her things again, not looking for anything in particular, just touching what was left of her. a habit I couldn't seem to stop. I was going through the last box from her closet when something thin slipped out and landed on the floor. It was an envelope, yellowed and soft around the edges, tucked between two old blouses. My name was written across the front. Anna. No dear, no love mom, just my name. For a moment, I just stared at it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, written in the same looping handwriting I'd grown up seeing on birthday cards and grocery lists. But this one was different. It felt heavier, even before I read a word. My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry for leaving without explaining everything. There were things I couldn't bring myself to tell you face to face, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust my strength. I've loved you more than anything in this world, but there's one truth I could never say out loud. The man you've always believed was your father wasn't. I stopped reading. The words blurred as my mind struggled to understand them. I read them again and again. Each time, they hurt a little more. No, that couldn't be true. My father, the man who raised me, who'd left when I was 10, he had to be my father. He looked like me, didn't he? Didn't he? My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I read on. Before you were born, I met someone kind and gentle, who made me believe in love again after years of loneliness. But life isn't kind to women who make mistakes. He was married, Anna. And when I found out, I walked away. A month later, I learned I was expecting you. My fingers tightened around the paper. I didn't tell anyone, not even Aunt Hay. I knew people would judge me. I knew your father, the man who later gave you his name, would never forgive me. But he agreed to raise you as his own when he found out, because despite everything, he loved me. You were born into love, Anna. Not scandal, not shame. Love. Even if that love was complicated. I lowered the letter and just sat there. The rain outside tapped softly against the window like it was listening too. I felt dizzy, like the ground under my life had shifted. All those years, all the times I'd wondered why my father had left so suddenly, why my mother never spoke ill of him, why she never let me ask questions about their past. It wasn't because she was hiding pain. It was because she was protecting me, protecting his memory, her secret, and my peace of mind, all at once. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words in my head. The man you believed was your father wasn't. It felt like I was standing in a room full of broken glass, afraid to move, afraid of what I might step on next. But by morning, curiosity outweighed the fear. I needed to know who he was. I went back to the notebook, searching through every entry. Near the end, I found a small folded note taped to the inside of the cover. It simply said, "If she ever wants to know, ask Dr. Miller." Dr. Miller. The same doctor she had written about years ago? The one from the hospital? It took me 3 days to find him. He was retired now, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a tiny white fence and a garden full of roses. When he opened the door, his eyes widened. "Anna," he said softly, You look just like her." My throat tightened. "You knew my mother?" He nodded. "I did. She was one of the bravest women I ever met." I held out the note. "She left this for me. She said to find you." He sighed deeply and invited me in. The house smelt like books and old wood. After a long silence, he said, "Your mother asked me never to tell anyone, but I suppose now she meant you to know." He walked to a shelf and took down a small photo frame. Dusty, the glass slightly cracked. Inside was a picture of my mother, young and radiant, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. "This was him," the doctor said quietly. His name was Michael Turner. He volunteered at the hospital back then, helping with patients, always smiling. They met during one of her checkups. My voice trembled. "Is he still alive?" The doctor hesitated. "He was, but he passed away 10 years ago." My chest sank. The chance to meet him, to see his face, hear his voice, was gone before I even knew he existed. Before I left, Dr. Miller handed me a small envelope. "She left this with me years ago, said if you ever came looking, I was to give it to you." Inside was a photograph, my mother holding a newborn baby, smiling down with tears in her eyes. Behind her stood the same man from the earlier photo, Michael, looking at both of us with a tenderness that broke my heart. On the back of the photo, in my mother's handwriting, were 5 simple words. "He saw you before he left." That was it. That was all I needed to know. He had seen me. He had known I existed. Even if our lives never crossed again, for one small sacred moment, I have been held in both their love. I walked home slowly that evening, the world around me blurred and quiet. The setting sun painted everything in a soft, forgiving gold. All my life I'd carried questions. Why did my mother hide things? Why was she so protective? Why did she sometimes look at me like she reminded me of something she couldn't say out loud? Now I knew. I was her greatest joy and her greatest secret. She lived every day balancing between the weight of guilt and the light of love. And she chose love again and again, even when it cost her everything. When I reached home, I placed the photograph on her nightstand. For the first time since her death, I didn't cry. I just smiled softly through the ache because I finally understood her. Every silence, every look, every sacrifice, it all made sense now. A few weeks later, I decided to visit the cemetery again. This time, I brought the photograph with me. It was a warm afternoon. The air smelt like blooming grass and sunlight. I sat down beside her grave and laid the picture gently against the stone. "I found him, Mom. And I found the truth. You didn't have to protect me anymore. I would have loved you just the same." For a moment, The breeze lifted, carrying the scent of lilacs, her favorite flower. It felt like her answer, like she was saying, "I know, sweetheart. I know." That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. No guilt, no anger, just love. Quiet, full, and eternal. Because sometimes the truth doesn't destroy us, it sets us free. The days after that visit felt different. Not lighter exactly, but gentler, as if the air around me knew how to breathe again. I stopped avoiding the kitchen where my mother used to hum old songs. I stopped turning away from her picture on the wall. Instead, I let the memories come, one at a time, like waves that no longer frightened me. Every morning I made tea the way she did, strong, a little bitter, and with the cup warmed first. At first it hurt, like reopening a wound, but gradually it became my ritual of connection. Each sip felt like saying, "Good morning, Mom." I started keeping fresh flowers on her table, too. Lilacs in spring, daisies in summer. She once said flowers reminded her that life keeps blooming even after the frost. Now I understood what she meant. Neighbors who'd once stopped by out of pity began visiting just to talk. They'd tell me stories I'd never heard about my mother lending them money quietly, leaving food at their doors, babysitting their kids while they worked late. She had been everyone's silent blessing. I had never realized how far her love had reached. One night, I sat down with the same notebook that had carried her secrets. There were still blank pages left, and for the first time, I felt they belonged to me. I began to write a letter, not to my mother, but to myself. Dear Anna, you are her daughter in every way that matters. You inherited her strength, her patience, her quiet kind of love. Don't waste time wondering why she didn't tell you sooner. Some truths are too heavy to share until the right moment, and she waited until you were strong enough to carry them. When I finished, I felt something lift. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was peace, the kind that sits softly in your chest and whispers, "You're going to be okay." A week later, I went to see Aunt May, my mother's older sister. We sat on her porch, rocking chairs creaking under the weight of afternoon sun. "I found Mom's letter," I said quietly. Aunt May nodded slowly, eyes misty but not surprised. "She made me promise never to tell you. She said you'd find it when you needed it most." "Did she ever talk about him? About Michael?" "Once," Aunt May said. "She told me he was the kind of man who brought light into rooms, and that losing him taught her how to make her own. That's how she raised you, out of her own light." I smiled, tears slipping down before I could stop them. In that moment, I felt closer to both of them than ever before. Grief doesn't disappear, it changes shape. It turns from thunder into a quiet hum that follows you around, a reminder, not a wound. I began volunteering at the local hospital, the same one where my mother had worked. The first day I walked through those halls, I felt her there, in the smell of disinfectant and fresh linens, in the hum of machines, in the nurses' soft laughter. It was like walking through her memories. There was an elderly woman in room 12 who reminded me of her. I started bringing her tea and sitting with her during visiting hours. She'd hold my hand and say, "You look like someone who carries stories." And I'd smile because she was right. I did, my mother's and now my own. A month later, while cleaning the attic again, I found one last small wooden box. Inside was a folded piece of fabric, a baby blanket, faded but carefully kept. Pinned to it was a note in her handwriting. For Anna's first child, may she never wonder if she was loved. I pressed the blanket to my face and let the tears fall freely. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. And in that moment, I promised myself, that when I became a mother, I would speak love out loud every single day. On the anniversary of her passing, I visited her grave again. This time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I brought lilacs, her favorite, and the photograph of us together. The sky was a soft blue, the kind she used to call forgiving weather. I knelt beside her stone and whispered, "Mom, I finally understand you. You didn't hide the truth because you were ashamed. You hid it because you wanted me to live freely, without shadows. Thank you for loving me more than your own peace." A warm breeze swept through the grass. The lilacs moved just enough to make the petals fall across the photo, like a quiet blessing. And for the first time, I felt her not as someone gone, but as someone everywhere. That night, I sat by my window looking out at the stars. I thought about everything she had done, all the sacrifices I never saw, all the kindness I never thanked her for. And I finally understood something simple but profound. Love doesn't always shout its name. Sometimes it whispers in the background, quietly shaping everything it touches. Sometimes it hides behind silence, not because it's weak, but because it's strong enough to let go. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again, slower, humbler, softer. I started teaching art at a local community center. The kids painted stories with their hands, messy and honest, the way life really is. Whenever one of them painted a mother, I'd feel my heart swell. I kept her photo on my desk, the one where she was laughing, caught mid-moment, eyes full of light. Whenever things got hard, I'd glance at it and whisper, "Help me be like you, Mom, brave in quiet ways." On what would have been her birthday, I wrote one final letter to her. "Dear Mom, you gave me the truth when I was ready for it. You showed me that love is not about being perfect, but about staying when it's hardest. I used to wish you'd told me everything sooner, but now I know the timing was part of the gift. Wherever you are, I hope you can see that I'm okay. I'm living, really living, the way you wanted me to." I folded the letter carefully and set it in the garden under the lilac tree. The wind lifted it gently, carrying it somewhere beyond my reach, and maybe straight to her. In the end, I learned that truth isn't always something we're meant to discover early. Sometimes it waits, patient and kind, until we've grown enough to hold it without breaking. My mother's silence wasn't a lie. It was love in disguise. And even though she's gone, her love still fills every empty space I once feared. Now, when people ask me about my mother, I smile. I tell them she taught me the truest thing there is. A mother's love doesn't end. It just changes its form, from hands that hold you to memories that guide you. It's strange how life keeps moving even after the biggest heartbreaks. The sun still rises, the kettle still whistles, and somehow your heart learns to beat around the missing pieces. It's been a year since my mother's passing. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, sometimes like yesterday. But in that time, I've learned that grief doesn't always ask to be healed. Sometimes it just asks to be understood. Every morning when I open the curtains, the first light touches her photo on my desk. She's smiling in it, not posing, not aware, just caught in one of those in-between moments when life is still unguarded. That's the version of her I carry with me now. I still talk to her sometimes, not out loud, not in words, but in the quiet parts of my day. When I see a lilac bloom, I think, "You'd love this one, Mom." When I'm tired and unsure, I hear her voice, steady and kind, reminding me to keep going. It's funny, I used to think love was something that ended when someone was gone. Now I know it doesn't. It just changes how it shows up. Love becomes a memory that guides you. It becomes strength you didn't know you had. I used to carry guilt for not understanding her, for being impatient, for not saying "I love you" enough. But guilt is heavy, and love was never meant to weigh that way. So now I try to live differently. Every time I help someone quietly, I feel closer to her. When I choose kindness over pride, I hear her laugh. When I face a hard truth with calm instead of anger, I know that's her courage living in me. She once told me, "Love doesn't need to be seen to be real." Back then, I didn't really understand. Now I do. She wasn't just talking about relationships. She was talking about life itself, the unseen things that hold us together when we think we're falling apart. A few months ago, I went back to our old house one last time. The walls were empty now, the furniture gone, but I could still feel her there, in the scent of the wood, in the echo of laughter long faded. I stood in the middle of her room and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for everything you never said and everything you still teach me." And as I closed the door, I realized letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with peace instead of pain. If there's one thing my mother's life taught me, it's this. Love is not measured by grand gestures, but by quiet endurance. It's the hand that never lets go, even when no one's watching. It's the sacrifice that doesn't ask to be noticed. It's the truth we're only ready to face when love has already prepared us for it. She lived her whole life carrying a truth that could have broken her, but instead she turned it into light, and that light still guides me. Now, when I meet someone struggling with guilt or loss, I tell them about her. Not her secret, but her spirit. How she taught me that forgiveness isn't always about others. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself for not knowing sooner. Sometimes I see young women arguing with their mothers or rolling their eyes, and I want to tell them, don't wait too long to listen, because one day you'll wish you could hear that voice again, even if it's just to say, "I was wrong, Mom. You were right." But I don't interrupt them. I just smile, because I know life will teach them too, gently, in its own time. I often wonder what she'd think of me now. Would she be proud? Would she see the woman I've become and smile that knowing smile of hers? I think she would, because I finally learned what she spent her whole life trying to show me, that love doesn't always come with answers, but it always leaves you better than it found you. There's a peace that comes when you stop fighting the past and start thanking it. And that's what I do now. Every night before bed, I whisper 3 words into the dark. Thank you, Mom. Not for the easy days, but for the ones that tested me, shaped me, and taught me to see love in silence. The lilac tree outside my window has grown taller this year. Every spring, it blooms brighter, as if the earth itself remembers her. Sometimes children stop by to smell the flowers, laughing, carefree. And in their laughter, I hear her voice again, soft, content, eternal. I've stopped searching for closure because I realize now there's no such thing. There's only growth. And love, if it's real, never really ends. It simply finds new ways to stay. If I could leave anyone listening with one thought, it would be this. Sometimes the truth we fear the most is the one that finally sets us free. Sometimes love means staying silent so someone else can dream without fear. And sometimes the people who seem the quietest are the ones who loved the loudest, just in ways we didn't understand at the time. So if you still have someone to call mom, tell her thank you, not just for what she did, but for what she carried, quietly, so you could stand tall. And if she's already gone, look up at the sky and whisper it anyway. She'll hear you, because love, real love, always finds its way home.